The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cramped courthouse waiting area, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The morning rush of people seeking justice, disability hearings, and administrative resolutions created a constant buzz of nervous energy. Among the crowd sat Harold P. Iterson, a 73-year-old man whose weathered hands trembled slightly as he clutched a manila folder containing his medical records and disability claim paperwork. Harold's appearance told the story of a man who had seen better days. His jacket, though clean and pressed, showed its age through small repairs and faded fabric. His shoes were polished, but worn thin at the heels. Most telling were his eyes, which carried the distant look of someone who had witnessed things that younger generations could never imagine. He walked with a pronounced limp, favoring his left leg, and occasionally winced when shifting positions in the uncomfortable plastic chair. The courthouse waiting area was filled with the usual mix of people seeking various forms of legal resolution. Families awaiting custody hearings whispered anxiously in corners. Young lawyers shuffled through paperwork with nervous energy. Court clerks moved efficiently between desks, processing the endless stream of documentation that kept the judicial system functioning. Harold checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. His disability hearing was scheduled for 9:30, and he wanted to ensure all his paperwork was in order. The Department of Veterans Affairs had been processing his claim for service-connected injuries for nearly 2 years, and today's hearing represented his final opportunity to present his case before a federal administrative judge. As he approached the check-in desk, Harold pulled out his military identification card from his wallet. The card had seen better days, its lamination slightly peeling at the edges, the photograph showing a much younger version of himself in military dress uniform. The card bore various codes and designations that meant nothing to casual observers, but held significant meaning within military circles. The court clerk, a woman in her mid-30s named Sandra Mills, looked up from her computer screen with the expression of someone who had processed hundreds of similar cases. Her manner was efficient but detached, the result of years spent managing the bureaucratic machinery of the court system. Harold placed his identification on the counter along with his hearing notice. His voice was quiet but clear as he spoke. Harold Peterson reporting for my 9:30 disability hearing. I have all my medical documentation and service records here. Sandra glanced at the military ID with barely concealed skepticism. She had seen plenty of questionable identification over the years, and something about this particular card struck her as suspicious. The photograph looked authentic enough, but the card itself appeared worn and outdated compared to the crisp military IDs she occasionally encountered. "This is your current military identification?" Sandra asked, holding up the card with obvious doubt in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. That's my retired military ID. I served from 1968 to 1992. Sandra's expression shifted to one of open skepticism. She had dealt with plenty of people attempting to claim benefits they weren't entitled to, and her experience had made her suspicious of anything that didn't look absolutely pristine and official. "Sir, this card looks like something you could have printed at home. Are you sure this is legitimate military identification?" The waiting area had grown quiet, with several people turning their attention toward the exchange at the check-in desk. Harold's face remained composed, though a slight tightening around his eyes suggested the question had stung. "Ma'am, I can assure you that identification is genuine. I earned it through 24 years of military service." A man sitting nearby, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase, looked up from his smartphone and snorted with amusement. "These fake veterans are everywhere now. Probably bought that thing at a surplus store for $20. Another voice joined in from across the waiting area. "I see them all the time at the VA hospital, pretending they served so they can get free health care. It's disgusting what some people will do." Sandra held the ID up to the light, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. "The lamination is peeling, and this photograph looks like it was taken decades ago. How do we even know this person in the picture is you?" Harold's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "That photograph was taken when I retired from active duty in 1992. The card shows normal wear because I've carried it every day for over 30 years. The man in the expensive suit stood up and walked closer to the desk, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Look at him. Does he look like military material to you? Real veterans take care of themselves and their appearance. This guy looks like he's been living on the streets." A woman waiting with her teenage son chimed in with cruel laughter. "My brother served in Iraq, and his military ID looks nothing like that beat-up piece of plastic. That's obviously fake. Sandra seemed emboldened by the support from the crowd. She placed the ID on the counter and pushed it back toward Harold with obvious disdain. Sir, I'm going to need you to provide legitimate identification for your hearing. This card is clearly not authentic military identification. Harold picked up his ID with hands that shook slightly from a combination of age and suppressed emotion. His voice remained calm, though those who knew him well would have recognized the steel beneath his quiet demeanor. Ma'am, I understand your skepticism, but I can assure you this identification is genuine. I served my country for 24 years, including multiple combat deployments. I earned every designation on this card through service and sacrifice. The expensive suit man laughed openly. Service and sacrifice. Sure, buddy. What did you do? Serve coffee and some cushy office job. Real combat veterans don't go around begging for handouts from the government. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. What none of the mockers in the courthouse waiting area realized was that Harold Peterson's worn military identification contained information that would have commanded immediate respect from anyone with genuine military knowledge. The faded cardboard designations indicating service with the 75th Ranger Regiment, multiple combat deployments to Southeast Asia, and specialist training that had been classified for decades after his retirement. Harold had enlisted in the United States Army in 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War. Unlike many of his generation who had sought ways to avoid military service, Harold had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments available. After completing basic training and advanced individual training, he had volunteered for Airborne School, Ranger School, and eventually Special Forces training. His first deployment to Vietnam came in 1969, where he served as a reconnaissance specialist with a long-range reconnaissance patrol unit. These small teams operated deep behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and conducting targeted operations that often meant the difference between life and death for larger American units. During his first tour, Harold had participated in operations that remained classified decades later. His unit had been responsible for locating and neutralizing high-value targets, disrupting enemy supply lines, and providing critical intelligence that shaped major military operations throughout the region. The small codes and numbers on Harold's military identification told a story that few civilians would ever understand. His service record included 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat, a Bronze Star with V device for valor under fire, and a Silver Star for extraordinary heroism during a mission that had saved the lives of an entire American platoon. But Harold's service hadn't ended with Vietnam. He had remained in the military for 24 years, serving in various special operations units around the world. His expertise had taken him to Central America, the Middle East, and numerous other locations where American interests required the skills of highly trained special operations personnel. The tremor in Harold's hands wasn't simply due to age. During his final combat deployment, an improvised explosive device had left him with traumatic brain injury and permanent nerve damage. The limp that made him walk carefully through the courthouse was the result of shrapnel wounds that had required multiple surgeries and years of physical therapy. His modest appearance and worn clothing reflected not a lack of pride in his service, but rather the practical mindset of a man who had learned to value substance over appearance. Harold had never been one for flashy displays or boastful stories about his military service. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. As the mockery continued in the courthouse waiting area, Harold remained silent and composed. He had faced far worse challenges than a few ignorant civilians questioning his credentials. His military training had taught him patience, discipline, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. What Harold didn't know was that his simple act of presenting his military identification for check-in had triggered a series of events that would soon transform the entire atmosphere of the courthouse waiting area. When Sandra had scanned Harold's military ID into the court's computer system, the information had been automatically cross-referenced with federal databases maintained by the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. These systems contained detailed service records for all military personnel, past and present. The moment Harold's identification number entered the federal database, it triggered an immediate alert to courthouse security. The alert indicated that a highly decorated Special Operations veteran was present in the building, and that his service record contained information requiring special security clearance to access. Chief Court Security Officer Michael Rodriguez received the alert on his secure communication device while conducting his regular morning rounds. Rodriguez, himself a Marine Corps veteran with 15 years of service, immediately recognized the significance of the alert codes appearing on his screen. The designation codes associated with Harold's identification indicated service with units that Rodriguez knew from his own military experience represented the absolute elite of American Special Operations Forces. The alert also showed multiple combat decorations and a service record that commanded immediate respect from anyone with genuine military knowledge. Rodriguez immediately contacted Court Administrator Patricia Chin, informing her that they had a highly decorated Special Operations veteran in the building whose credentials were being questioned by courthouse staff. Chin, understanding the sensitivity of the situation, immediately began coordinating an appropriate response. Judge William Harrison, who was scheduled to preside over Harold's disability hearing, received an urgent briefing from Administrator Chun about the situation developing in the waiting area. Judge Harrison, whose own son had served with the 82nd Airborne Division, understood immediately that a grave injustice was taking place. The judge requested Harold's complete military service record, which required special authorization to access due to the classified nature of many of his operations. When the records arrived, Judge Harrison spent several minutes reviewing the extraordinary details of Harold's military career. The service record painted a picture of a soldier who had consistently volunteered for the most dangerous assignments available. Harold's units had operated in some of the most contested areas of Vietnam, conducting missions that had directly contributed to saving American lives and achieving strategic objectives. His decorations told the story of a man who had repeatedly risked his own life for his fellow soldiers and his country. The Bronze Star citation described how Harold had single-handedly held off an enemy assault while his wounded teammates were evacuated to safety. The Silver Star citation detailed an operation where Harold had penetrated enemy lines to rescue American prisoners of war, fighting his way through superior enemy forces to complete the mission. Judge Harrison also reviewed Harold's medical records, which showed the lasting impact of his military service. The traumatic brain injury, chronic pain from multiple combat wounds, and post-traumatic stress disorder had all been documented by military medical personnel and confirmed by independent medical examinations. As the judge reviewed these records, he realized that Harold Peterson represented everything admirable about American military service. Here was a man who had given the best years of his life to protecting his country, who had suffered permanent injuries in that service, and who was now being mocked and humiliated by people who had never made a fraction of his sacrifice. Judge Harrison made an immediate decision. Rather than waiting for the scheduled hearing time, he would personally intervene in the situation developing in the courthouse waiting area. This kind of disrespect toward a genuine American hero could not be allowed to continue in his courthouse. Meanwhile, the mockery in the waiting area had continued to escalate. The man in the expensive suit had been joined by several other people who seemed to be enjoying the spectacle of questioning Harold's military credentials. "I bet he never even left the United States," sneered a woman carrying designer handbags. "Probably spent his whole fake military career pushing papers in some air-conditioned office." The teenager sitting with his mother looked up from his phone long enough to add, "My video game has more realistic military stuff than that fake ID card." Sandra, the court clerk, seemed to be enjoying her role as the primary skeptic. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the courthouse if you can't provide legitimate identification. We can't have people with fake military IDs disrupting our proceedings." Harold's response remained measured and dignified. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but this identification is genuine. If you need additional verification, I have my DD-214 discharge papers and other military documentation in my folder." The expensive suit man grabbed the folder from Harold's hands before he could react. "Let's see what other fake paperwork you've got here." He began rifling through Harold's carefully organized documents, pulling out medical records, service documentation, and personal papers that Harold had spent weeks preparing for his hearing. "Look at this stuff," the man announced to the waiting area. "Probably printed all of this at home on his computer. Anyone can fake military paperwork these days." Other people in the waiting area began gathering around to look at Harold's documents, treating his most personal and private military records as entertainment. Harold's face remained impassive, but those who knew combat veterans would have recognized the dangerous stillness that had settled over him. At that moment, the doors to the waiting area opened, and Chief Security Officer Rodriguez entered, followed by Court Administrator Chin. Both were walking with the purposeful stride of people who had important business to conduct. Rodriguez approached the group gathered around Harold's scattered documents. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. I need everyone to step back from Mr. Peterson immediately and return his documents. The expensive suit man looked up with annoyance. We're just checking whether this guy's military paperwork is legitimate. Looks fake to me. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Sir, you need to return those documents immediately and return to your seat. This situation is being handled by courthouse administration. Sandra looked confused by the sudden intervention of courthouse authority figures. These officers are here because I was questioning the authenticity of this man's military identification. It doesn't look legitimate to me. Administrator Chin stepped forward, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent years managing courthouse operations. Ms. Mills, Mr. Peterson's military identification has been verified through federal databases. His credentials are not only legitimate, but indicate service of the highest distinction. The crowd that had gathered around Harold began to look uncertain. The confident mockery of moments before was being replaced by growing unease as courthouse authority figures took control of the situation. At that moment, the main courthouse doors opened again, and Judge William Harrison entered the waiting area. This was highly unusual, as federal judges rarely left their chambers to address situations in public areas of the courthouse. Judge Harrison was an imposing figure, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades commanding respect in courtrooms across the federal system. His presence immediately commanded the attention of everyone in the waiting area. The judge walked directly to Harold, who had begun gathering his scattered documents from the floor where the expensive suit man had dropped them. Mr. Peterson, Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent waiting area. I am Judge William Harrison, and I will be presiding over your hearing today. I want to personally apologize for how you have been treated in my courthouse. Judge Harrison then did something that shocked everyone present. He bent down and began helping Harold gather his scattered documents, treating each paper with obvious respect and care. As the judge helped collect Harold's military records, he examined the worn military identification card that had started the entire controversy. His voice was loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear clearly. Mr. Peterson, I have reviewed your complete military service record, and I want everyone in this courthouse to understand exactly who you are. Judge Harrison stood and addressed the entire waiting area, holding Harold's military identification with obvious reverence. This identification belongs to a man who served our country with extraordinary distinction for 24 years. Master Sergeant Harold Peterson served with the 75th Ranger Regiment and Special Operations Units in some of the most dangerous combat zones in American military history. The judge's voice grew stronger as he continued. The man you have been mocking is a recipient of 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with V device for valor, and a Silver Star for extraordinary heroism. He risked his life repeatedly to save his fellow soldiers and protect American interests around the world. The expensive suit man's face had gone completely white. The confident mockery had been replaced by obvious shock and growing horror at what he had done. Judge Harrison continued his public declaration. The tremor in Mr. Peterson's hands is the result of traumatic brain injury sustained while serving our country in combat. His limp is from shrapnel wounds received while conducting operations to protect American lives. His modest appearance reflects not a lack of pride, but the humility of a genuine hero who has never sought recognition for his extraordinary service. Sandra, the court clerk who had started the controversy, looked as though she wanted to disappear into the floor. Her face was flushed with embarrassment and shame as the full weight of her mistake became clear. The judge then addressed her directly. Ms. Mills, this gentleman's military identification is not only legitimate, it represents service of the highest caliber. The codes and designations on this card indicate operations that remained classified for decades after his retirement. Judge Harrison's voice took on a tone of steel as he addressed the entire waiting area. What I have witnessed here today represents a failure of basic respect and human decency. This man gave 24 years of his life to protecting the freedoms that allow us to gather safely in this courthouse. He sustained permanent injuries in that service, and he deserves our gratitude, not our mockery. The silence in the waiting area was complete. People who had been laughing and making jokes minutes earlier now avoided eye contact and seemed to be searching for ways to make themselves invisible. Judge Harrison then made an announcement that would change courthouse procedures permanently. Effective immediately, this courthouse will implement new protocols for the treatment of military veterans. All courthouse staff will receive mandatory training on recognizing and respecting military service. Any future incidents of disrespect toward veterans will result in immediate removal from courthouse premises. The judge then turned to Harold, who had stood quietly throughout the entire confrontation with the same dignified composure he had maintained from the beginning. Mr. Peterson, your disability hearing will be conducted with the full ceremony and respect that your service merits. I want you to know that your sacrifice has not been forgotten, and your service will always be honored in this courthouse. Harold's voice was quiet but clear as he responded. Thank you, Your Honor. I didn't serve my country for recognition, but I appreciate your respect. At that moment, something remarkable happened. Other veterans who had been present in the courthouse waiting area began to stand. First one, then another, then several more, until nearly a dozen people were standing in silent tribute to Harold's service. An elderly man who had been sitting quietly in the corner approached Harold with obvious emotion. Master Sergeant, I served with the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. It's an honor to meet you, sir. A younger woman in her 40s stepped forward. My father served with Special Operations in Afghanistan. He always told me to recognize and respect the warriors who came before him. Thank you for your service, Master Sergeant Peterson. One by one, other veterans and family members of military personnel approached Harold to express their respect and gratitude. The waiting area that had been filled with mockery and cruelty was transformed into a gathering of people united in appreciation for genuine military service. The expensive suit man who had been the primary instigator of the mockery approached Harold with obvious shame and embarrassment. Sir, I owe you a profound apology. I had no right to question your service or treat you with such disrespect. I am deeply sorry. Harold's response demonstrated the character that had made him an exceptional soldier. Apology accepted. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them. Sandra, the court clerk, approached with tears in her eyes. Master Sergeant Peterson, I am so sorry for doubting your credentials. I will make sure your hearing proceeds with all the respect and efficiency you deserve. Harold nodded graciously. Thank you, ma'am. I understand you were doing your job. No harm done. Judge Harrison made one final announcement to the waiting area. Let today serve as a reminder that heroes walk among us every day. They often appear humble and unassuming because their character was forged through service and sacrifice, not through seeking attention or recognition. We owe it to ourselves and our country to treat these heroes with the respect they have earned. The judge then personally escorted Harold to the hearing room, where his disability claim would be processed with the full attention and respect that his extraordinary service merited. The transformation in the courthouse waiting area was complete. People who had been strangers minutes earlier were now engaged in respectful conversations about military service and the importance of supporting veterans. The cruel mockery had been replaced by a sense of community and shared appreciation for those who had served their country. As Harold disappeared, read into the hearing room with Judge Harrison, the people left in the waiting area began to disperse, but many continued their conversations about the importance of recognizing and respecting military service. The lesson of the morning would be remembered and shared, ensuring that Harold's dignity under pressure had created a lasting positive impact on everyone who witnessed it. The courthouse had been forever changed by the presence of a genuine hero who had asked for nothing more than basic respect and fair treatment. Harold Peterson's quiet dignity and extraordinary service record had transformed a moment of cruel mockery into a celebration of the values that make America worth defending. His story would be told and retold throughout the courthouse and beyond, serving as a reminder that true heroes often walk among us unrecognized, carrying their service and sacrifice with humble grace, waiting only for the basic respect that every human being deserves.